The late afternoon sun cast long, golden reflections across the water, and the air smelled of pine sap and freshly cut grass. I was sitting in my old rocking chair on the back porch, watching my grandkids cast their lines into the lake that had been in my family for generations. Their laughter echoed across the rippling water, that pure kind of joy that only children can summon, the kind that makes an old man's heart swell. But the peace didn't last long. From the gravel path behind the house, I heard the crunch of heavy footsteps, followed by a sharp, deliberate clearing of the throat. I didn't need to look up to know trouble was coming. I'd been dealing with this man for months now. "Hey, you can't be out here with that many people." The voice was sharp, nasal, dripping with authority he didn't actually have. I turned slowly, the wood of the rocking chair creaking under me, and there he was, Tom Reynolds, 37 years old, self-appointed enforcer of the HOA, puffing his chest out like a sheriff walking into a saloon. He wasn't even looking at me. His eyes were fixed on my guests, on my daughter and her husband, on my grandchildren playing by the dock. His face twisted into a frown as though the sight of them enjoying the lake was a personal insult. "This is common property," he barked, his voice carrying across the water. "You're not allowed to have non-residents here without board approval." The audacity made my blood run hot. Common property? That lake had belonged to my father before me, and his father before him. We'd fished those waters long before this neighborhood ever existed. Long before Tom and his HOA cronies had plastered the area with signs and rules. I stood slowly, deliberately, letting the screen door slam shut behind me. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked toward him. I could feel the eyes of my family on my back, their laughter silenced now into nervous quiet. Even the birds seemed to hush as I squared my shoulders and faced him. "You want to run that by me again?" I asked, my voice low, steady, and maybe a little dangerous. Tom smirked, mistaking my calm for weakness. He held up a clipboard, the papers fluttering in the light breeze. Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the HOA Charter. Non-residents may not utilize community spaces. That means your so-called guests need to leave. Now. My jaw tightened. I could feel my hands ball into fists at my sides. Every instinct in me screamed to put this man in his place, to remind him exactly who he was dealing with. But instead, I let the silence stretch, staring him down, until his smirk faltered just slightly. "You're standing on my land, Tom," I finally said, each word slow and deliberate. "That lake isn't community property. It's private property, my private property." For the first time since I'd known him, Tom didn't have an immediate comeback. His lips parted, then closed. His eyes darted from me to the lake, then back again, as though trying to process what I'd just said. Behind me, my grandkids giggled nervously, not quite understanding the tension but feeling it nonetheless. My daughter's hand rested on their shoulders, protective, watchful. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. And as I stood there, waiting for his response, one question burned in my mind, and surely in the minds of my family too. Just how far was Tom willing to go to take something that was never his in the first place? I'm 70 years old and I've lived on this land nearly my entire life. My name's Richard Hayes, though most folks around here just call me Rick. I'm not some flashy man, never have been. I was a mechanic for 45 years, the kind of guy who kept the town's trucks and tractors running through winters that would buckle lesser men. My hands are thick and scarred, my back a little bent, but this land, this lake, has kept me standing tall. You see, this property isn't just dirt and water, it's a legacy. My grandfather bought it in the 1920s, a stretch of pine-covered hills and a crystal lake tucked between them. Back then, it was nothing but wilderness, a place where he could raise his kids with room to run. My father grew up fishing here, swimming here, chopping firewood along these banks, and when I came along, it became my playground, my sanctuary. I learned how to swim in that lake. I kissed my high school sweetheart on that dock. I brought my kids here every summer to camp under the stars, and now my grandchildren are learning to skip rocks across its glassy surface, just like I did. This lake is my family's story carved into the earth, and no piece of paper written by a bunch of HOA suits can erase that. But then came the subdivision. 10 years ago, developers purchased the surrounding woods around the lake, carving them into neat half-acre lots. Before long, what used to be a quiet slice of heaven turned into cul-de-sacs and driveways lined with SUVs. The new families brought with them the endless march of rules: trash bins hidden, grass cut to regulation height, Christmas lights taken down by January 15th. And to enforce all those rules, they brought in the HOA. At first, I thought I'd be left alone. After all, my property sits on the far end of the lake, with a gravel driveway that winds so deep into the pines you'd miss it if you weren't looking. I figured as long as I paid my taxes and minded my business, the HOA would keep to itself. That's where Tom Reynolds came in. Tom was 37, sharp jaw, hair slicked back like he was running for office every day of his life. He had this habit of wearing polo shirts tucked into khakis, even on weekends, like he thought he was in some magazine ad for suburban success. But behind the pressed clothes and fake smile was a man addicted to control. From the moment he got himself voted president of the HOA, he treated it like his personal kingdom. He was the kind of guy who measured grass blades with a ruler, who knocked on doors if someone's car was parked 2 inches over the curb. He relished writing fines, passing out warnings, strutting around like a sheriff with a badge no one had given him. And me? I was the one thing he couldn't control. The first run-in came 2 summers ago. My grandkids were swimming at the dock when Tom showed up, claiming community rules required life jackets. I laughed in his face. We'd been swimming here for nearly a century without his permission. He didn't like that. Then came the letters. Slipped under my door. Folded neatly and pinned to my gate. They were full of legal-sounding nonsense about easements in shared waters, each one ending with a thinly veiled threat. Failure to comply may result in legal action. I ignored them, but ignoring Tom was like pouring gasoline on his fire. Every week, he got bolder. He'd walk right up to my property line and glare like a hawk. He'd corner my guests in the neighborhood parking lot and demand to know their business. He even once tried to lecture my daughter about guest registration while she carried groceries into the house. It was harassment, plain and simple. Now here's the thing. Most of the neighbors were too scared to cross him. I'd see them at the store, and they'd whisper how they couldn't stand Tom either, how he fined them for the dumbest things: a garden hose left unrolled, a flower bed planted outside approved color schemes. But when push came to shove, they stayed quiet. Tom ruled through intimidation, and nobody wanted to be his next target, except me, because this wasn't just about fines or rules. This was about the lake, about the one piece of my family's soul he thought he could stake a claim on. Every letter I burned in the fireplace felt like defiance. Every glare I ignored was my way of saying, "You'll never own this." But deep down, I knew Tom wasn't going to stop. Men like him don't back down. They escalate. And the worst part? I had no idea just how far he was willing to go. Because while I thought he was just a nuisance, Tom was already plotting something bigger. Something that could take more from me than I ever imagined. The lake, my land, my peace, everything I held dear, was in his crosshairs. And if I didn't find a way to stop him, I'd lose it all. T started small, as these things always do. A week after the confrontation by the lake, I found another letter tucked into my screen door. The envelope was crisp, the kind of paper you'd expect from a lawyer's office. But I recognized Tom's blocky handwriting on the front. Inside was a neatly typed notice. Mr. Hayes, it has come to the attention of the HOA board that your property is in violation of community standards. Guests not residing within the neighborhood must not use common facilities, including the lake. Failure to comply will result in fines and further action. Sincerely, Thomas Reynolds, HOA President. I didn't even finish reading before I crumpled it in my fist. Common facilities. That lake wasn't theirs to regulate. I tossed it straight into the fire that night, but it was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, I was fixing the chicken coop when I heard voices near the tree line. My property is marked clearly. Old cedar posts, driven into the ground decades ago, with a rusted wire fence running between them. Tom was there, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 other board members. They were standing just inside the boundary, pointing toward my dock like surveyors. "What do you think you're doing?" I barked, stomping over, dirt still clinging to my boots. Tom turned slowly, That smug smile plastered on his face. Routine inspection. HOA policy allows us to review property use that may impact community resources. Community resources? I snapped. That dock was built by my father in 1952. There's nothing community about it. He didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned a little closer, lowering his voice. You think you're untouchable because you've been here forever. But the rules apply to everyone, Rick. You can't just ignore the board. My blood boiled. Step 1 foot further and you'll regret it. For a moment, silence. The other two men shifted uncomfortably, clearly not eager to test me. Tom smirked, scribbled something on his clipboard, and finally turned back toward the subdivision. But I could feel it. This wasn't over. Over the next month, I started hearing whispers. At the diner in town, a couple of my neighbors, the Johnsons, leaned across the booth to warn me. Rick, you need to be careful, Mrs. Johnson whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Tom's been saying you're trespassing on HOA property. He's trying to convince people the lake belongs to the community. I laughed bitterly. The deed says otherwise. Her husband shook his head. Doesn't matter. He's spreading stories, telling folks you're selfish, that you're hogging the lake when everyone should share it. Selfish. The word stung. My family had maintained this land for nearly a century. We cleaned the shoreline, cared for the woods, and kept the lake stocked with fish. And now I was being painted as the villain? The worst part was seeing the fear in their eyes. They hated Tom's rule, but nobody dared to stand against him. The harassment picked up like clockwork. One morning, I woke to find bright orange notice of violation signs staked into my yard. They cited ridiculous rules. Grass length exceeds HOA standards. Unapproved dock modifications. My grass was trimmed, my dock unchanged since before Tom was born. Another day, I came home from town to find my driveway blocked by a shiny black SUV. Tom was inside, windows down, sunglasses perched on his nose. He didn't move until I walked right up to the hood, fists clenched. Only then did he roll forward, muttering something about respecting authority. At night, I'd catch the glint of flashlights near the tree line, shadows moving through the woods. When I shouted, they vanished, leaving only broken branches and muddy footprints. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was trespassing. The breaking point for me came one Saturday afternoon. My daughter Emily had driven up with her kids for a weekend visit. She'd just finished unloading groceries when Tom appeared at the end of the driveway. Ma'am, he said loudly, as though speaking to a courtroom, do you realize your father is in violation of community bylaws by hosting unauthorized guests? Emily's face flushed with anger. Guests? This is our family's home, our lake. Who do you think you are? Tom's smile never wavered. I'm the HOA president, and unless your father complies, there will be consequences. I stormed out onto the porch, fists trembling. That's enough, Tom. You've crossed the line. But he just tipped his head slightly, smirk still intact, and walked away. His silence was worse than any threat. A month later, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was a stack of papers filed with the county office. A claim by the HOA asserting that the lake was shared community property. They were trying to rewrite history, to twist the law into their weapon. I spent hours at my kitchen table, flipping through the documents, my glasses sliding down my nose. The language was designed to confuse, full of legal jargon, but the intent was clear. If they won, my family's lake would no longer belong to me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the frogs croak by the shoreline, the wind rustling the pines. For the first time in years, the land didn't feel safe. It felt fragile, vulnerable, but fear turned into resolve. If Tom thought he could bully me into surrendering, he had another thing coming. Not everyone was against me. Quietly, a few neighbors began reaching out. Old man Crawford slipped me a note at the hardware store. Keep fighting. We're with you. A young couple from 2 streets over stopped by one evening with a pie, whispering that Tom had fined them hundreds for leaving Christmas lights up too long. It was clear, Tom wasn't just after me. He was terrorizing the whole neighborhood. But while they whispered their support, none were brave enough to stand publicly. They were too afraid of his retaliation. And so, I stood alone. The weeks dragged on, and the tension wore me down. Every time I saw headlights crawl past my driveway at night, I wondered if it was Tom, plotting his next move. Every time the mail came, I braced for another notice, another legal trick. My daughter worried about me. She said my hands shook more when I poured my coffee. My grandkids asked why I was always so quiet, why I stared so long at the lake instead of laughing with them. It wasn't just a fight for land anymore. It was a fight for dignity, for peace, for the right to pass something sacred onto my family without it being stolen by a man drunk on power. And I knew with bone-deep certainty that Tom wasn't finished. No, he was just getting started. It happened in early September on one of those heavy days when the air feels thick, like the whole sky is holding its breath. The cicadas buzzed from the trees, and the lake shimmered under a haze of heat. My daughter and her kids were visiting again, trying to squeeze out the last of summer before school started. We were on the dock, the kids dangling their feet in the water, when a convoy of cars pulled into my driveway. SUVs, polished and black, crawl up the gravel like beetles. Doors slammed, and out stepped Tom Reynolds, flanked by 5 other board members, all holding clipboards and wearing the smug look of men who thought they'd already won. My stomach tightened. Something about the way they carried themselves told me this wasn't just another notice, another warning. Tom didn't waste time. He marched right up to the dock, his loafers crunching on the gravel, his clipboard held like a weapon. "Mr. Hayes," he announced, voice loud enough to echo across the lake, "you are in violation of community property regulations. Effective immediately, the dock, shoreline, and lake access are under HOA control." My daughter gasped. My grandkids froze, water dripping from their toes. I stood, every muscle in my body rigid. "You've lost your mind, Tom. This isn't community property. It's my land. My deed says so." Tom smiled. That same cruel, satisfied smile I'd come to hate. He pulled a thick folder from his bag and slapped it against the clipboard. "Not anymore. The board has voted. We've filed with the county. Unless you can produce evidence otherwise, this lake is no longer yours." For a moment, the world tilted. I saw red. My father's face flashed in my mind. Him teaching me to tie a fishing lure, his voice telling me, "Take care of this place, son. It's ours." And here was Tom, erasing it all with a smirk and a stack of papers. But he didn't know what I knew. See, Tom thought he was clever. He thought I was just some old man clinging to the past. But what he didn't realize was that I'd spent weeks preparing. After that certified envelope arrived, I'd driven straight to the county records office. I'd sat for hours poring over dusty ledgers and microfilm reels, tracing my family's ownership back almost 100 years. The deed was airtight. The lake, the shoreline, every inch of water. It was all mine, and I had copies of every document to prove it. But I also knew Tom wouldn't just accept papers shoved in his face. Men like him thrived on spectacle, on control. So I bided my time, waited for him to overplay his hand. And now, standing on my dock with my family watching, my neighbors peering from behind curtains across the lake, he had done exactly that. I squared my shoulders and stepped forward, my boots thudding against the planks of the dock. "You want proof, Tom? Fine. Let's make this official. Let's bring it to the town council meeting tonight." His smirk faltered just slightly. "There's no need for theatrics. The board has already—" "No!" I cut him off, my voice booming louder than I intended. "You've harassed me for months. You've lied to your neighbors. You've tried to steal what's mine. If you're so sure of yourself, then you'll have no problem standing in front of the council and saying it to their faces." For a moment, silence. Then, sensing the crowd that had begun to gather at the edge of the cul-de-sac, Tom straightened his shoulders. He couldn't back down now, not in front of an audience. "Fine," he snapped. "Tonight." That evening, the council chamber was packed. Word had spread fast. Neighbors filled every bench, whispering, murmuring, their eyes darting between me and Tom. My daughter sat behind me, her hand on my shoulder, her kids clutching her arms. Tom strutted to the front like a man taking the victory lap before the race even began. He laid out his claims with practiced confidence. The HOA represents the best interest of the community. Mr. Hayes has repeatedly violated bylaws by hosting unauthorized guests. The lake should be reclassified as community property. He spoke for nearly 15 minutes, weaving lies into half-truths, flashing his polished smile at the council members. By the time he finished, some of the crowd was nodding uncertainly. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, my legs heavy but steady. I carried with me a weathered leather folder, the same one my father had kept important papers in. I set it on the podium, the wood groaning under its weight, and opened it with care. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice low but clear, "this isn't about bylaws. This isn't about rules or fines. This is about truth." I pulled out the deed, yellowed with age, stamped with the county seal from 1927. The room leaned in. This land was purchased by my grandfather nearly a century ago, passed down to my father, then to me. Every inch of shoreline, every drop of water, it belongs to my family. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I laid down the succession of deeds, tax records, maps, each one a nail in Tom's coffin. Tom shifted in his seat, his smile cracking. "And if you think this is just sentiment," I continued, "here are the county records from last month, confirming ownership in my name. No ambiguity, no loopholes, just fact." I slid the papers across the table toward the council. The chairwoman adjusted her glasses, scanning them carefully. The room went silent, save for the faint rustle of pages. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Reynolds," she said firmly, "these documents are conclusive. The lake is Mr. Hayes's private property. The HOA has no jurisdiction." The words hit like a thunderclap. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in murmurs of disbelief. My daughter squeezed my shoulder, tears in her eyes. My grandkids grinned, whispering, "Grandpa won." And Tom, his face drained of color. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but no sound came out. For once, the man who always had a smirk, always had a comeback, was utterly speechless. The chairwoman wasn't finished. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Furthermore, Mr. Reynolds, the council has received multiple complaints regarding harassment, intimidation, and unauthorized entry onto Mr. Hayes's land. These actions may constitute trespassing and harassment under county law. We will be referring this matter to the sheriff's office for investigation." Gasps again. All eyes turned to Tom. He stammered, his polished composure unraveling. This is outrageous. You can't—" But his voice was drowned out by the councilwoman's gavel slamming down. "This hearing is concluded." The room erupted once more. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak now clapped me on the back, shook my hand, whispered their thanks. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. And Tom, he slunk out of the chamber, his head down, the smirk gone. He had strutted in like a king and left like a beggar. Walking out of that council chamber, the night air felt different, crisp, alive. The cicadas still buzzed, but now it sounded like a song of victory. My daughter hugged me tight, whispering, "Dad, you did it." I looked down at my grandkids, their faces lit with pride. And for the first time in months, I smiled without the shadow of Tom's harassment hanging over me. But even in victory, I knew this fight wasn't just about me. It was about standing up to bullies like Tom, men who thought power gave them the right to take what wasn't theirs. And though Tom had been humiliated tonight, I had a feeling this wasn't the last I'd hear of him. But one thing was certain. He'd never touch my lake again. The days after the council hearing felt different, lighter, freer. For the first time in months, I could walk down to the lake without scanning the tree line for flashlights or glancing at the mailbox in dread. The air smelled sweeter. The water sparkled brighter, as if the land itself had been waiting for that weight to lift. News spread quickly. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down began stopping by my porch. Mrs. Johnson brought over a basket of muffins, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We were all too scared to stand up to him," she admitted, wringing her hands. "But you did what we couldn't. Thank you, Rick." Others followed, old Mr. Crawford tipping his hat, the young couple with their toddler, even folks I barely knew. They all said the same thing. Relief. Relief that someone had finally cut Tom down to size. that his reign of intimidation had been broken. And Tom, he vanished. For weeks, his shiny black SUV didn't crawl past my driveway. The clipboard, the smirk, the constant harassment, gone. Word was, after the council referred his actions to the sheriff's office, he'd faced fines of his own. Harassment, trespassing, and even misuse of HOA funds came into question. He resigned in disgrace, slinking out of meetings he once dominated. By the time autumn rolled in, he was little more than a bitter memory. Life returned to normal. Better than normal, really. My grandkids ran down the dock without fear, their laughter carrying across the lake like music. My daughter came more often, saying it finally felt safe again. Even the neighbors began using their yards more freely, unafraid of being fined for the length of their grass or the color of their flowers. The lake, my lake, shimmered under the crisp autumn sun, just as it had for generations. I'd walk its edge in the early mornings, the mist rising off the water, and I'd feel my father there beside me, proud. One afternoon, sitting in my old rocking chair, I watched my youngest granddaughter reel in her first fish. Her squeals of triumph echoed across the water, and I thought, this is why we fight. Not for land, not for titles, for moments like this. But victory wasn't just about keeping the lake. It was about standing up when everyone else was too afraid. About showing that no man, no matter how loud or entitled, has the right to bully others into submission. Tom had power because people believed he couldn't be stopped. He thrived on fear. And when I finally stood up, when I brought the truth into the light, his power crumbled. I realized something important then. Dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you protect. And if you let men like Tom take it once, they'll never stop. That fall, I decided to put everything in writing. I gathered my children and grandchildren around the fireplace, the deed and documents spread out on the table. I told them the story of my grandfather, of my father, of how the lake had been passed down and cared for through generations. This land is more than dirt and water, I told them. It's our history, our legacy, and one day, it'll be yours to protect. My daughter squeezed my hand. My grandkids nodded solemnly, their young faces full of pride and determination. In their eyes, I saw the future, one where this lake would always belong to our family, no matter who tried to take it. The first frost came early that year. I stood on the dock one morning, breath clouding in the cold air, the lake a mirror of silver glass. Behind me, my family's laughter drifted from the house, warm and alive. I thought about Tom then, about how small and hollow his victory had seemed when stripped away. He'd tried to steal something sacred, something bigger than him, and in doing so he'd lost everything. His power, his respect, even his place in the community he claimed to serve. Me? I still had the lake. I still had my family. I still had the dignity he could never touch. And as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in gold, I whispered to myself the truth I'd learned through it all. Property is just land, but when it carries your family's soul, defending it isn't a choice, it's a duty. And no bully, no HOA, no self-proclaimed ruler can ever take that away.